That we will decide according to the URL entered. If the entered URL is valid, then success function should execute. If not valid, then failure function should execute. So then what are success and failure? Success and failure are callback functions. Success and failure are callback functions. Out of these functions, which one will execute? That depends on the URL. For example, we have a condition. If URL is matching with something, http://api.com/product something. If it is matching with this complete path, then what should happen? A success function will execute. Success is a function. Otherwise, else what will happen? A failure function will execute. So what is success and failure? These are callbacks. A callback is configured so that it will execute according to the situation and the state. So this is the function with callbacks. What is good? What is bad about this? So these days we are not using much callbacks. So now in the modern JavaScript, we are ignoring this callback mechanism. Almost majority, all JavaScript libraries are changing their libraries from a callback to promises. They are changing now. Recently, every library of JavaScript is changing from callback to promise. So what is the problem with callback? Actually, what is callback? So it is a mechanism of configuring set of functions that execute according to state and situation, according to state and the situation. So it is a mechanism of configuring set of functions that execute according to state and situation. But what is problem here is callbacks use synchronous technique, sync technique. Sync technique, it is a synchronous technique. It's a synchronous technique. So usually synchronous technique, it is always slow. Synchronous is not fast. It is always slow. Synchronous is a blocking mechanism. It is a blocking technique. That means what happens when one task is performed, it will not allow to do any another task. It will allow to finish the task and proceed to next. Usually synchronous and asynchronous is a simple technique. Suppose you have some set of values. Means what is difference in synchronous and asynchronous? Suppose we have A. This A is some 2 MB. We have some B. This is 10 MB. We have C. This is 1 MB. And we have D. This is some 4 MB. Like this. Now what happens is from a client, the request will come to read all of them. The request will come to the first. It will come to the first. It is 2 MB. So if it is a synchronous, then it will wait until the 2 MB response is completed. Once the 2 MB response is completed, then it will show that result and it will go to the next one. And it is 10 MB second one. It will wait until 10 MB is finished. But 10 MB takes long time. So there are others which are less than that, but it will not proceed to next until it completes the first. This mechanism is called as what? Synchronous. That means it will not go to the next until it finished the previous. This is synchronous technique. What is asynchronous technique? Asynchronous technique is it makes a request for first. And if it is taking time, then it immediately makes a request for second, it makes a request for third, it makes a request for fourth. And which one is lightweight? That is delivered first. That means you will see that C is first, after that 2 is A is first, after that D is first, after that B. That's the order how it delivers. Just like you see, suppose you are using WhatsApp, you are offline. So 7:30 p.m. some friend sent a video. 7:35 he sent some text. 7:40 he sent some image, and you are offline. You suddenly online. Then which one will come first? In the same order how he sent. In the same order how he sent. That means the video will come, after that text will come, after that image. But video is not loaded. You will see text first. But according to order only it will come. But why you are able to see text first? Because it is lightweight and it is displayed. Video is still loading. Image is still loading. That is asynchronous. If it is synchronous, you will never see the text until video is completely loaded. Once video is finished, then it will go to text. After that, it will go to image. This is the mechanism of synchronous and asynchronous. So usually these callbacks use synchronous mechanism. Then obviously they are slow. That means they use blocking technique. So which is not great for applications. That's the reason these days you will see less concept of callbacks used. So we don't prefer callbacks, and the modern libraries are converting their callbacks into what? Promises. What is the solution for this? I will tell you. For example, see now, how do we manage? We are using fetch. Fetch is expecting URL, and I will ask prompt, and I will say enter URL. After that, it is expecting success, which is a function. This success function is going to return document.write some message like, so data fetched successfully. This is important. And so here we have another function. What is this function? It is document.write, say invalid operation, or unable to fetch data, something like this. Invalid URL, unable to fetch data, something like this. Now, when I run this, this is using a callback mechanism. So the callback mechanism is this. Enter URL. I entered some wrong URL. Then immediately it says invalid, unable to fetch. And you entered a correct URL, http://api.com/what products. Then it says data fetched success. This is just a understanding concept, because this generally you learn already in JavaScript. Here I am just giving an overview of what is callbacks. And what is the issue with callback? Issue with callback is it uses synchronous technique. Now, how the modern JavaScript handles the same? This is example for that. How modern JavaScript handles the same? Actually, the modern JavaScript handles this by using another concept called promises. it handles by using promise. So in JavaScript, you generally learn about concept of promises. And promise is an replacement for callbacks. What is the advantage of promise? The promise allows asynchronous techniques. Generally, callbacks use synchronous. This allows asynchronous. So it is more faster. And this is more recommended. Majority, every library recently. That's the reason 1-2 months back, when we train people on React, we have to train them on different libraries. A lot of third-party libraries were there. So up to last 1-2 months, majority of all libraries were using callbacks only. And now recently they transformed into promises. That's the reason you will see a lot of variation now. Concept is same, but the way of configuring and accessing is different. And if you are following some tutorials online, some queries online, like you visit some forums, you ask a question, they post a solution. This method is not working for me. What is solution? You will find the solution. Now be careful, because you read how many days back it is posted. If the solution is posted 4-5 months back, then it may be using completely callbacks, which will fail now. Because now all libraries changed from callbacks to what? Promises. Majority. That's the reason you need to be very careful in understanding which version you are downloading and installing. In React, I will show you. While installing a library, how it varies from the previous versions, we will see that. So without that, if you try to implement, they don't work. Recently, that is one technical issue our developers are facing, because now libraries majority are converted into promises. They are using promise everywhere. And if you learn JavaScript, in JavaScript, there are so many promises inbuilt. Inbuilt promises are there. Like, in JavaScript, I created a fetch method here. In JavaScript, directly there is a fetch method. Directly there is a fetch method, which is a promise. This fetch method is a promise type. It is a promise type. And usually this fetch is used for making AJAX call in JavaScript. In JavaScript, we make a AJAX call to communicate with API, get the data from API and return the data. Generally, what is a promise is nothing but, so promise is an alternative for callbacks in modern JavaScript. It is an alternative for callbacks in modern JavaScript. And promise is asynchronous. So it is faster when compared to callbacks. It is faster when compared to callbacks. So generally, promises are the most commonly used modern concepts. They are most commonly used things. Now, how this promise works, I will show you. One small point we will see how to configure a promise. Actually, it is called as a promise because it is just like a real life, daily life, how you make promise to anybody. That means, what is the concept of a promise? Promise have 3 states. You made a promise. When you made a promise, 3 states. First, initial state. Initial state means the promise you made, you haven't started any work on that promise. That means the promise not yet started. So second one is fulfilled. That means the promise that you made, you fulfilled. Third one is rejected. That means the promise you made, you are unable to fulfill. That means every promise have 3 basic phases. One is initial phase, promise resolved, promise rejected. Every promise comprises of three basic things. And success is resolved and failure is rejected. Just like we created, callback have success and failure. So promise have three options, right? Promise comprises of three phases. Promise contains three phases. One is initial phase, initial phase, promise resolved, and promise rejected. These are the three phases. So generally, initial phase is nothing but initial phase defines the actions to perform. It defines the actions to perform. Resolved. So resolved is nothing but resolved specifies that promise fulfilled. Promise is fulfilled. And rejected specifies that so promise failed, right? That is. And actually resolved is defined with then. We use a then method. And rejected is defined with catch. We have a then and catch. So there are so many other things you will later learn while dealing with React. In React, while working with different functions, several examples we can see them. Now, that is generally you know about promises in JavaScript. That's the basic thing you need to know. Now, I will show you how do we configure the promise. Now, the callback, I will change into a promise. Actually, so we have a fetch, and fetch is a new promise. It is a promise type. This promise comprises of two options. One is resolve and another one is rejected. It contains two functionalities to perform. A promise you have to configure through new promise. And remember, this is an ES5 and higher version. That means JavaScript ES5 and higher only can understand promises. If any browser is not having ES5 and higher support, that cannot understand promise. So promise is JavaScript ES5 and higher onwards. Now, what is this here? We will define a URL and we will take the URL, enter URL. And here we write a condition. If URL is matching with http://api.com/some products, roughly I am defining. If it is successful, then what it will do, it will say resolve. This resolve will send a message. Message is saying that data fetched successfully. This message will come. Otherwise, rejected will come. It will send a message. So invalid URL. So and unable to fetch data. That is the configuration. That's how a promise is defined. Usually a promise is configured like this in JavaScript. Promise comprises of two states. One is resolved, another one reject. I'm using a lambda style. That means arrow function technique, right? And if URL is correctly entered, then resolve will send this message. If rejected, now the point here is who will catch the information coming from resolve and rejected. So in the promise, this is catched by then. then we'll catch the message coming from promise when it is successful. Catch will collect the message when it is failed. That means the catch is going to get that message when it is failed. So when a promise is made, this is the action it performs. Now see here, usually we call the fetch, and usually fetch contains so a then option. Then means it defines the functionality to happen when it is success. I will use a parameter message, and this message should display. That means document.write. So we need to I will put success, and the success message is coming from what is resolved. That means whatever resolved here, this resolved will be sent into the message when it is successful, and that message we are displaying here. Then you have another function. What is another function? We have catch. Catch is a callback. It will call the message, and it will print document.write. This is an error. The error message, whatever it caught, it will get that and display. This is a new promise technique. Previously, what you have seen, that is callback, and this is promise. And a promise can contain multiple then. A promise can contain catch. A promise can contain finally. You can have various options for promise. Later, you will see some real-time promises, and we will learn how to use them when we start working on React. Already, if you have done with your JavaScript, in JavaScript, you use a lot of promises, which are inbuilt promises. Like fetch is one promise for fetching the data. I will show you one small. Actually, this is what is difference between callback and this. The difference between callback and this: callback is synchronous, and fetch is the promise is asynchronous. Same concept here we are implementing. So same concept we are implementing, but we need to display that message, right? We will see how to implement that in a real world environment. We will see that. Just I created, but it is not fulfilled, because to fulfill the promise, you need some more implementation. I just given a syntax for handling it. Whatever result comes, we need to present that result and access the result. Just only syntax I explained here. This is one example syntactically like this. Usually promise contains so a fetch then method, and it will contain a catch, and it will contain a finally. I will show you a real-time example of promise. Means one basic real-time example of promise, how it works. I will show you one real example here. Let's see. In JavaScript, we have some promises. So we will see now here. I will show you a promise, how it works. There is a promise in JavaScript fetch. Fetch can access data from any URL. I'm using http:. We have some fake store API.com. It is a sample API. We have some products. So some products, it is going to get some products. Actually, a ready-made API is present. Fake store API and /products. This is a sample API which will return some products data. It's a sample API for ERP like packages. That means you are building an ERP website. For building a sample ERP website, they provide some sample data. The fake store is a sample data of some products information is present. I'm just using this one. Ready-made API is there. That URL is this. We are fetching data from that URL. You see, Now, if the request is successful, then it will have then uses a callback function. This callback function will get the response from URL. And actually, the initial response from this URL comes in a format of binary. We have to convert that into JSON. So this will return response into which format? JSON. After that, we will use another then. This then will collect the data, which is the products information. The JSON returns an array of products. We have to access that array. Actually, you see the website, the fake store website products. You can see it is returning a JavaScript array. And array of what? Array of objects. And every object have an ID, title, price, something. Now what I am doing here, I am accessing that this products is an array. And you know how to read elements from an array. I am using products.map. You know JavaScript array methods. Map, we are reading every product. And I want to print every product, document.write, product.title. I want to print every product title in a new line. And if there is a problem, then we have to use what? Catch. Catch will get the error and we need to report that error. So document.write, we have to report the error. If there is a problem, then it will report the error. So promise contains a callback like technique, but it is not callback. Promise will execute then when request is successful. It will execute catch when request failed. Now you can see that it is going to get the data and display the data. So it is accessing all the data. I am using a simple promise, which is already present in your JavaScript. And that promise name is fetch. JavaScript have a promise called fetch, which is used by JavaScript people to communicate with APIs. Get the data from API and display the data. All these you can do by using fetch. And fetch is an example for a promise. And we will use this in our React also to communicate with API. React, so jQuery, so Angular, all these have their own libraries. Along with that, you can use these library also. That means you can use JavaScript techniques also to implement. This is a basic promise of JavaScript. So you need to know callbacks and promises. These are the two important examples. Just I given an overview to you about what is difference between a callback and a promise. What is the difference? Callback is synchronous and promise is asynchronous. You are going to see and use lot of promises. There I will explain more when we start working with different promise, their nature, how they work and all. But this is one JavaScript concept about promise, right? About functions actually. This is a point about function. Actually, earlier in JavaScript, we used to have async, await like options. We are not using them anymore. Everything we are going with only the concept of promises. We are not using async and await. Even today, sometimes you may see in old way of handling asynchronous. In JavaScript, they use async and await. But now we don't use them. We always prefer working with promise, right? Another one is actually in functions. So in Introduce Me, you may get about function generators. Because as I told you, React developers majority interview questions will be JavaScript. Right? As a React developer, you can answer React questions easily. Whatever they ask in React, 100% you can answer. There is no problem. Because that's just a library. And library related any question anybody can handle. and he can easily remember and he can easily narrate about it. But JavaScript related, that is where people face issues. Majority people fail React interviews because of poor knowledge on JavaScript. That means they are good in React, they can do everything in React, but in interviews they fail because of JavaScript. Because they give first priority for this. A person who is perfect in JavaScript, he can handle easily React, right? So you need to be aware of all this. Any idea what is a function generator? So in JavaScript, you have another important thing to understand, which I will give you here. Another important part you need to know is about function generator. Function generator. So what is a function generator and what is the concept of function generator? Let's see. What is the concept of function generator? For example, I have where some categories is equal to array. I have an array like electronics, like footwear, like this. Now fashion, like this, we have some array. How do we read all the elements from array? We need to read all the elements from array. You know, we have loops. We can write a for loop. For where I is equal to 0, I less than what? Categories dot length and I plus plus. And we have to print document dot write categories of I. That means it is going to print 0, 1, 2, 3 and all. This is a loop. Actually, instead of using this loop, I can use here for where item of collection categories. And I can read every item and I can print every item. That means document dot write item. I hope you already learned in JavaScript how to use iterators, right? Actually, this is a loop and this is an iterator. What is difference between a loop and a iterator? By using loop, you can read all the elements. By using an iterator also, you can read all the elements. What is difference between a loop and a iteration in computer programming? For example, you learned any other programming, you know there is a for each. For each, people call it as an iterator. Here we have for in, for of. These are iterators. What is difference between a loop and a iterator? What is difference? What is the basic difference between a loop and iterator? So the basic difference between loop and iterator is loop requires an initializer. It should tell from where to start. Loop requires a condition. It should tell when to stop. Loop requires a counter which tells how to proceed. Proceed to next or proceed to previous. That means loop requires a initialization, requires a condition, and requires a counter. And see, iterator is not having any of them. Iterator is not having initialization. It is not having a condition. It is not having a counter. Then how it knows from where to start? Then how it knows where to end? Then how it knows how to proceed? If you don't mention where to start, how it knows where to start? If you don't mention when to stop, how it know when to stop? But it will do the same. So without initialization, without condition, and without a counter, how it reads? What is the mechanism behind it? How a for each works? How a map works? How a find works? How a filter works? They all work with a mechanism. They use a mechanism called function generator. They use a mechanism called function generator. That means internally, all the iterators are designed by using a generator function. They are designed by using generator. Several years, our developers were not directly working with these generators because these are hidden, and they are kept hidden because general development doesn't needs them. They just need to use for, but they don't need to know how this for works. But now developers are digging deep into the programming. Developers want how this is designed because they also want to design their own iterators. That means now developers are asking the technologies that you give more depth about your concept so that we can build like that. That means now developers ask that we want to build our iterator. Then why? How? Then these technologies, they started releasing their internal concepts to general public. In that way, this generator is one important thing. I hope you know loops, they will read. Do you know loops are going to read? It will read from 0. After reading 0, it will go to 1. After that 2. After that 3. How it knows that 0 is finished? How it knows that 0 is finished? Where it stores this 0? Can anybody tell? Where a loop is going to store information about its previous iteration? Where a loop is going to store information about its previous iteration? Any idea? It's a very tough one because that only person. Actually, for this internally, they use a concept called symbol. They use a concept called symbol. Symbol is a new data type, you know. Symbol use a new data type in JavaScript. In JavaScript, it is a primitive type. It's a JavaScript primitive type. This symbol type is used to keep the information about the previous operations. And earlier we don't use this because we don't know this, but it is internally there. The for loops use this. Now they made it available to developers also. They say that you also try this. You can create such loops by yourself. So what is the main concept of React? Like, see, you are a React developer. Then company thinks that you are genius in web development. React is not a small profile. React is a high professional web designing profile. Very high professional. That means if you say React, then they think you as an genius in web technology. Right? A person with React like profile is really a genius in web technology. Company assumes that. That means they expect a lot from experienced people. For fresher, it's okay. But from experienced people, they expect so much in depth about the concept because they need to build all this in different situations. So that is the reason knowing the architecture of every concept is important. For a 10 years experienced person, what they ask in interviews, they ask about the architecture behind every concept. Remember only 2 points. For a fresher, they will ask what is the concept. And for an experienced person, they will ask how this concept works. Keep that in mind. That means you said how to read elements from a collection. Then fresher will say, I will use a for loop. Then for experienced person, we will ask how this for loop works. What is the architecture behind this for loop? How it stores the information about previous iteration. So what it is built with, that is important. That is what actually the symbol type is, right? Now the point is this generator is used. This generator is used for managing iterations. I will show you a simple. That means the point is, see, for where item of collection. Collection is what? Categories. Document dot write. I am printing item. That means what it is going to do? It is going to read the first item and store here. And it is going to print that. After printing, it will automatically proceed to next item. How it knows there is next item or not? And how it will proceed to next? What is happening behind this? I will show you. Actually, this is going to print the detail. This is going to print the detail. It is showing all the list. But how this concept is working? By using a concept called function generator. Usually function generators are created like this. Function asterisk and the generator name. Generator name like get values. That is a generator name. This is how a function generator is created in JavaScript. And what is the meaning of asterisk? Asterisk is a meta character. This meta character indicates 0 or more occurrence. You know, asterisk plus symbols. In meta characters, what is the meaning of asterisk? You have meta characters now. You have meta characters, asterisk. We have question mark. We have plus. What is the meaning of asterisk? 0 or more occurrences. Question mark, 0 or 1 occurrence. Plus 1 or more occurrences. Asterisk indicates 0 or more occurrences. That means this indicates that this function will execute 0 times if there is no data, more times if it is having data, right? Now, how this is going to return values? By using yield. Generally, normal functions return a value by using return. But this will return by using yield. It will yield some 10. It will yield some 20 like this. Yield 20. It will yield 30. That is what it returns. Now the question is how this generator works. I will show you. We will create a reference, some obj. This is related to get values. That means it is what type? This is a generator type. And observe carefully. Suppose we are using console.log. We are using obj. That means I am just printing that object. And observe what that object contains. Let's open the console. And the console, in the console, you can see the object is get values. You see it is a generator. And you see it is a generator type. And it is a prototype. It is a generator. And it is having lot of things. This generator is having lot of things. I will show you how it works actually. See now, this generator obj have a next method. Next method. Do you know what this next method will do is? It is going to return value. And it says done false. That means it reads the first value. And after reading the first value, it says that done false. Done false means it's not finished. Still there is data. That means how many times your iteration will repeat? Tell me, how many times your iteration will repeat until done is true? That means internally generator have a method. That method is done. What that done method is doing? The done method is returning true or false. It is returning true or false. If it is false, that means it's not finished. There is still more data. I told you, loop knows whether there is more data or not by using a condition. How iterator knows? Without condition. Without condition, iterator knows whether there is data or not by using a method called done. If done is false, that means there is more data. That means without using a counter, how it will go to next value? Without giving a counter, how it goes to next value? Because internally it have a next method which takes to next value. Internally, a generator having a next method. You have seen here, I'm using next method. I'm using next method. I will go here, console.log. I'm writing console.log. I'm writing obj.next again. And obj.next again. Now you can see that it reads 20. And still done is false. I am using one more time. That means it will read the next one. That means this is done is false. Still false because still it is looking for something. That means I am using now. There is no more data. If there is no more data, it says done is true. And the value is undefined. And once it receives information that done is true, then it will stop the iterator. Internally, a for or a map or a find is working like this. You might have used array.find, array.map, array.join, array.toString. All these are iterators. Array.forEach. All these are what? Iterators. How these iterators work without a condition, without initialization, without counter. Internally, that is managed by a generator. Generators internally have a method. They are designed in such a way that they can know where to start. They can know when to stop. They can know how to proceed. So how to proceed is controlled by next. When to stop is controlled by done. And when to start is defined by value. If value is defined, then there is some value it will read. When value is undefined, that means there is no more value. Undefined and done and the next, these are the functions it uses. This is the basic technique how the iterators work. The architecture behind every iterator is a generator. So technically generator is a function. Generator is a function technique. Generator is a function technique used for configuring iterations. It is used for configuring iterations. So it returns a value. It returns a value by using yield. It is returning a value by using yield. It moves to next iteration. So by using the next method, it initializes the reading by using value defined or undefined. If value defined, that means it will start reading. It initializes and it stops when done is true. When done is true. That is the basic concept of function generators. So these are very much required. You may ask, like, as a React developer, why and where we need this? Because you are responsible for creating your own components. Your own components must have your own behavior. That all you can do by using these kind of architectures, these kind of techniques. That means how you can create a component which can loop by itself, iterate by itself. So you can use generators. You can create your own generators, right? This is example for that. This is an example how the generator is created. The function generator is defined and how it returns. These are all important. These are all very, very important while working with. This is all basically the point of working with functions. I hope you are clear with these things, because this just an overview I given, right? Overview for JavaScript basics about functions. Because when you are designing components in React, you must aware of everything about functions. Okay. Now, after knowing functions, later we will learn about classes and oops. When we start classes, we will see them. Next, important, to start working with React components, you need to know about JavaScript module system. This is another basic. If in JavaScript you already know the module systems, that is good. Otherwise, a simple overview I will give here. Generally, what is a module? What is the concept of a module? Actually, remember, in building large scale libraries, when we are building large scale libraries in JavaScript, not only JavaScript, anywhere, actually you will have functions, you will have values, you will have factories, you will have services. That means the people who are involved in designing libraries, remember, you are the people involved in using a library. You are using a library, but people who are involved in building a library, they have to know some more points, right? They have to know these things like functions, values, factories, services, like things. Actually, what is a function? Function contains some functionality, some actions. Whatever actions you need, they are defined in function. And what is value? Value contains data. Data is in values, functionality is in functions. And if you want to use these values and functions everywhere, then how? I want to use some set of functions and values in different places. I want to reuse them in different places. How you use? For example, you return some functions and you return some values. You want to use them in 2-3 projects. Then how? Usually what we do is, actually, we build a factory. Generally, a factory is a collection of functions and values. A set of functions and values are kept in a factory. And what we do is, we import the factory and use in any project you want. We design one factory. In that factory, we will keep functions and we will keep the values. And wherever you need, you are building some apps, you are building some applications. Suppose this is some app 1 and you are building some app 2, you are building some applications, and you can import this factory and you can use that factory anywhere. Reusability. You can reuse your functions and values using factory. But factory using a factory in a function, in a application is not a great idea. It is not a great idea directly, because generally factories use a mechanism called, generally they work with a mechanism called single call. Factories use a mechanism called single call. They use a mechanism called single call. Single call means what? So suppose you want to access a function. That means in the factory, there is some function. You want to access a function. Then what you do is, to access any function from a factory, we have to create an object. Through that object, we can access a function. I want the function again. If I want the function again, the previous object is not used anymore. It is destroyed. You need to create another object. Again, you need to access the same function. That means every time, in order to access a function, you need to create an object. An object is required every time in order to access a function. It is in which mechanism? Factory. That's the reason our developers will not use these factories. They will use service. They inject these factories. These factories are injected into service. We inject factories into service, and we use these services in our project. We don't use factories directly. We use the services in the project. Why? Because service uses a mechanism called singleton. It uses a mechanism called singleton. In computer programming languages, singleton means an object is created for first request, and the same object is used across any number of requests. If you learned OOP concepts in JavaScript or anywhere, for a class, you can create an object. How many objects we can create for a class? How many objects we can create for a class? Any number of objects we can create. But if you designed a class in such a way that only one object can be created, then it is called singleton. Singleton is a software design pattern where we design a class in such a way that it can have only one instance. Only one object is created. We call it as singleton. Java, .NET, C++, everywhere you will find this singleton pattern. OOP language means you will find singleton. Singleton is a mechanism where an object is created for the first request. The same object is used across any number of requests. That means in order to build a library, you need to know about functions, you need to know about values, you need to know about factories and service. Which one is best to use in a library? Services. Services are built with factories. Factories are built with functions and values. A module works like a service. A module works like a service. That means you can keep a set of functions, values in a module, and you can import and use anywhere you want. And why module? Because module uses a singleton mechanism. That means you can import once and you can use any number of times. That is the mechanism of modules. You can create a reusable library for your project by using what? Modules. Generally, you know, in JavaScript, you already learned in JavaScript. Suppose you see here, I will show you a simple concept for you. Suppose I have a folder here, JavaScript. In the JavaScript folder, I will add a folder called library. You see, in this library folder, I will add a new file. That means some JavaScript file. I'm adding some JavaScript file, some print.js. It's a JavaScript file. In that, I return a function, print page, and it will use simple window.print like this. Now, I want to use that in my HTML page. In this page, there is a print button. So click print button to print page. And here we